Yeah, I echo all of that. I went through this, as you said, from the perspective of a regional manager while at EDR, and then I came in to Be Home on the very end of an acquisition of the Park 7 properties, 6 of those Park 7 properties. And to me, the most important thing is honesty. You got to say 5 words to the people that are impacted. This is going to suck. Because I don't think that people are honest with the teams that they take on.
Move-in day is stressful enough. If even one student shows up and there's no mattress, the whole experience falls apart. Bad reviews, hotel costs, and a lot of scrambling. Inspections miss mattresses all the time, and local stores rarely carry the right size. That's why student housing pros rely on studenthousingmattress.com, powered by Jameson Bedding. Their US-made mattresses ship quickly anywhere in the lower 48 and include the durable blue vinyl models everyone in the industry knows. Stay ready for move-in. Visit studenthousingmattress.com to learn more.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Student Housing Insight Podcast, where we are putting you in touch with all things student housing. I'm your host, Wes Deese. I'm also the CEO of Student Housing Insight. If this is your first time joining us, we are a platform for off-campus student housing professionals to network and share ideas as well as data. You can find out more about this platform at studenthousinginsight.com. In addition to the podcast, we also host the industry's monthly webinar for the U.S. called ShopTalk. Each month, we provide legislative and policy updates, typically from NMHC, that are impacting our industry. ShopTalk also provides a monthly overview of pre-leasing data on a national and a regional basis, along with a panel of operators who provide their on-the-ground observations. And we typically provide a topic of the month as well. So a lot of great information and data. If you are involved with the operations of student housing in the U.S., you should be registered to receive our monthly invites for ShopTalk, and you can do that by going to the website for ShopTalk. It is a separate website, but you can link to it through studenthousinginsight.com as well. But that separate website is shoptalk.info. There you'll also be able to see previous webinars, as well as all of the slide decks and information that we provide there. And don't worry if you didn't remember those websites. We'll provide a link in the show notes. So I tell you, I hate starting off a podcast apologizing for my voice. If you saw Shop Talk for April, you know I ended up losing my voice towards the end of that. Josh is probably going to have to make a lot of crazy edits and stops and starts to this that may seem a little out of sync, and it's probably just because I started coughing or whatever. So anyway, let's get into it. So we recorded this discussion live in Austin, Texas at the Interface Student Housing Conference in front of a room that was just really full of operators and owners and a lot of industry leaders who were attending our annual kickoff brunch for the conference. We've been doing this for several years now, this brunch, but I have to tell you, we've finally given it a name and some branding. It's now called the ShopTalk Link Up at Interface. ShopTalk, as I mentioned earlier, is the name of our monthly webinar where we talk about all things student housing operations, obviously. And so we're now extending that name to our in real life events, or IRL for short. And we did one, not only the one in Austin, but a week before Interface at a restaurant in Atlanta. And let me just say this: if you're watching this on YouTube, we'll put in some pictures from that event so you can kind of see what that was like. But we're going to be doing these Shop Talk link ups in cities across the country, including many campus towns as well. So if you're interested in being a part of those, well, it's invite only. So it's not going to be on our events page, but we've got great events listed there as well. So make sure you check that out. But here's what you need to do. You need to be connected to me on LinkedIn if we're not already, and then send me a DM or direct message that you're interested in attending a link up when we come to your city. And if your city on your profile doesn't match up, make sure you tell me which city that is. All right, so back to this brunch at Interface. Now, one of the reasons I started doing these live recordings at conferences, and specifically at Interfaces, because let's be honest, we all show up to these events and then kind of just scatter, right? We're meeting with clients, we're meeting with investors and lenders, but we rarely get the chance to just sit down as operators and talk openly about what's actually happening in our businesses, with our firms, at our properties. So that's what this conversation we're about to get into is about. And I intentionally brought together 3 executives to be our guests for this podcast who have all stepped into new roles with their leadership roles over the past year, specifically with their companies. And they're all COOs and heads of operations who are new, again, to their companies. And they're really the ones that are responsible for driving performance across their portfolios. And this discussion goes really deep into the real challenges behind recruiting and retaining talent. Why some of the most important roles in our industry are getting harder and not easier. We talk about what large-scale acquisitions and this whole thing that's going on with operator consolidation, what that actually looks like from the inside, and I would say a topic we don't talk about enough is the long-term pressures that are facing higher education and really what that means for our businesses. There's also this really kind of honest thread throughout the conversation, especially around what it actually takes to scale operations, lead large teams, and manage risk in today's environment. So if you're in operations, asset management, leadership within student housing, this is one of those conversations that should really challenge how you're thinking about your team and really your strategy. So, all right, let's get into it. Here's our conversation from the ShopTalk link up at Interface in Austin, Texas. Well, welcome everyone to the Student Housing Insight Podcast, live at Interface in Austin. Guys, this is something that I started kind of on a whim after starting the podcast. I think the first one that, Matt, I can't remember if you were on that first one or not. It seems like you may have been. It was literally, I had a microphone that I set in the middle of the table, had a couple of sponsors that I said, hey, come join us in this room, bring some presents for our guests. And we had a fantastic conversation that has now grown into this, and really appreciate all of you guys showing up and supporting, and appreciate our sponsors for upping this up a little bit, so it's not just me in an empty room talking to these 3 guys. And it's great to get everybody together, especially from an operations standpoint, because one thing that I really started realizing at these conferences is we get here and then go into a million different directions with our clients and investors and lenders and brokers, and we don't have a real good opportunity to sit down and talk amongst ourselves as operators and owners. So that is one of the reasons we are doing these type of events at the conferences. With that being said, I want to get into introducing our guests There's a reason these three gentlemen are up here with me today, because they have all stepped into COO or president of operations positions in this past year for their companies, join new companies, and I just wanted to pick their brain and kind of get their perspective on how that has gone, and maybe they've had some changes and things that they've thought about previously and want to talk about that. So I'm going to ask you guys to introduce yourself, and Jim, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Wes. Super excited to be here. My name is Jim Sholders. I am the president of Yugo USA. Started in September 2nd to be exact, the day after Labor Day. And I've basically been in the business my entire career, spent 13 years on site with Allen & O'Hara, 15 years with ACC, 10 years with CLS, and currently super excited to be in this position now, leading this great company.
All right. Thank you, Jim. Bryan Shelangoski. I am currently the EVP and COO at Be Home Student Living. Been in this role since August 4th, so I think I have a month on you. And previously served in a number of different capacities at both Greystar and EDR. Prior to that, similarly, been in student housing my whole career. Started out as an RA in undergrad. Needed the job because Omelet Maker wasn't cutting it in terms of the expenses. And just kind of worked my way up. Was working for universities and colleges and student housing for about a decade before joining the EDR, now Greystar team. And excited to be here and have a conversation today.
All right. My name is Chris Johnson. I currently serve as Chief Operating Officer for University Partners. Previous to that, spent 14 years at a public multifamily REIT called UDR, overseeing day-to-day property operations, data science, and innovation. So my day-to-day typically is property operations, data and innovation, and helping build University Partners into something special.
Well, Chris, we're definitely gonna listen tightly to the things that you say, because you've got the least amount of student housing experience, which we think is probably an important thing that we hear from you of what your outside perspective is looking in now. So, we had a prelim call last week, and first question I had for you guys is, what are we talking about in this industry that we should be? And Bryan, you kind of brought up consistency with customer service, and then we nailed that down a little bit more. And it really came down to, what's happening from a recruiting and a retention standpoint. And so my first question for you guys is, what are you finding are the roadblocks and the speed bumps when recruiting? And then kind of the second part of that, and what seems to be the reasons people are choosing to either leave their company or the industry as a whole? Who wants to take the first stab?
Yeah, I think recruiting has always been, the biggest challenge. It's always about people. And so when you talk about roadblocks, I was thinking about it a little bit since we spoke last week. And one of the things, I was talking with Bill Bayless earlier this morning, and I think one of the big differences that we face today, we used to have these incredible Res Life programs, right, where you had the people that lived on the property, got free housing. You started that way, I started that way, and it was just an amazing feeder system, I think, for bringing up the best and brightest talent. And so we filled a ton of positions over the years through that. And so I think that is one thing that's out there that's missing. But I also feel like in terms of the positions themselves, we're going through a lot of change as an industry. And so I think, with that change, there's stress. I think it is, on top of that and compiled to that, it is difficult to bring people in from outside of this business. You're an exception to it, but to bring them in at a high level and have them be successful or want to be here because it's a tough business. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I think I have two thoughts. I think first and foremost, the recruitment challenges start because of the retention challenges, right? And I know we all talk about that from time to time, but I think there's something there that maybe we're not focusing on enough. Everybody knows that it's more costly to go out and recruit a new position almost at every level than it is to just retain them. And I think that that's one thing that we can and should be focusing on more. To your point, the expectations have grown exponentially of our teams over the years. We're asking more. I mean, I say it frequently, but the regional manager position is easily the most difficult position at our company. It always has been. And I can't imagine being a regional now compared to when I was a regional a decade ago. It is exponentially more challenging. And so I don't think we talk about enough how we can retain those folks, especially at that level. And I guess the other note that we talked about last week on the prep call that I mentioned is, compensation obviously is always a topic of conversation. And I brought up the maintenance positions. Those I think are one of the most challenging, if not the most challenging category of positions that we have. And what makes it challenging is it's not even just an internal thing, right? It's not just in our industry, because there are a lot of markets where we are paying a maintenance tech the same as Lowe's pays, their staff. And so why would they not go down the street, go to Lowe's, have a arguably easier job without on-call responsibilities for the same amount of pay? So that's something that, we have to be talking about, I think, a little bit differently than what we have in the past.
Yeah, and I'd maybe just add, the change that the industry is experiencing, I think, there's an opportunity there as we go forward to really say, what does the landscape of student housing and career pathing look like as we go forward? I think a lot of the new technology, the innovation, a lot of the new operating processes, whether there's a centralized or on-site component, present an opportunity for us to really kind of look at it and redefine it over time and hopefully resolve some of these roadblocks of, I think my observation coming in is that somebody who's very, very strong at a property or in a market, they've got an opportunity to be a regional manager and then go and kind of become, regional at like a corporate level. But then beyond that, the opportunities are somewhat limited and challenging, and they don't always necessarily evolve with somebody's life as their kind of personal life grows in around them. And so I think the opportunity that we have is to kind of say, hey, like, how do we retain these people long-term and create kind of bigger and better jobs, leveraging the technology, leveraging all the new tools that we have so that we can really retain that talent and grow and develop it over time.
You said something I want to double click on and kind of get everybody's opinion on. You said the regional position is much harder today than it was 8 years ago. It's been 8 years since the last time I had a regional that was reporting to me. So I'm not sure that I'm familiar enough with what is making that more tough. Is it more properties? What, can you guys kind of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that the ratio has necessarily changed. I think most, if not all of us, are in that, sort of 4 to 6, 4 to 7 range for student housing per regional. I think the expectation is we have so many more platforms, we have so much more reporting, and especially in third-party management, the clients are exponentially more involved. That makes it challenging. It's much more challenging to put on a different hat depending on which client or ownership group you're talking to. So for me, that is what makes it very difficult. I had challenges when I was a regional 10 plus years ago, but I just think it's exponentially more today.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I think on some levels, there's definitely new challenges, right? There's the new technology. Of course, when I went from ACC to CLS, where we did third party, that is very eye-opening in terms of the challenge that goes along with dealing with different people. But I think that's largely always been there. It just depends on what you're working with. I think that in some ways where you see centralization, I think sometimes does the opposite. I actually think it actually frees them up in the sense that where they used to be solely responsible for taking care of something, now some other process is maybe there to backfill that. And so I think it's a little bit all over the board. I think that, there is sometimes a tendency to want to load up ratios to make your management company profitable. I think that makes it very difficult. And clearly the markets you're in dictate the challenge as well.
So I want to go back to the question, or talk about the other topic that we came up with when I asked that question about what are we talking about, or what are we not talking about that we should be. And one that we came up with is, really kind of the challenge that academia and higher ed are dealing with as far as pressures on them. And so what do I mean, by those pressures? So federal funding is obviously something that's come up this past year that's a stumbling block for them. Demographic collapse, which we've been talking about, for a while. Falling birth rate, 13 to 15% decline through 2040. Demand erosion, high school grads going to college has fallen from 70% in 2016 to 62% in 2025. The ROI on a bachelor's degree is dropping. And these are all compounding the pressures. And Deloitte actually came out back in August with their annual state of higher ed. And they said that all of this is going to be leading to a 13% decline in university enrollment by 2041. We don't talk about these things at conferences because for obvious reasons. And I think it's something that is operators, especially when we start thinking about tertiary markets, because I don't think a lot of the flagships and the Power Four are not really being impacted by this. One would say West Virginia University may be an exception to that. And I'm having, as a consultant, more and more conversations with investors that are in these tertiary markets that are looking to see if a conversion, to multifamily or some other purpose makes more sense. And the question I wanted to put out there was, are we as operators prepared? Do you guys feel like we're prepared to talk with our clients about these pressures on these institutions, and what should we be saying to these investors and providing a plan for them?
I think that especially in the third party side, you find yourself in that, well, somebody buys a property, has a property, whatever the case might be. And there's definitely been some universities that have had some massive enrollment issues, and it's affected everything, including occupancies. It's difficult to have those conversations if they've already bought it, because generally speaking, they don't want to hear all the reasons why you can't lease the beds. They want to hear the solution for how you're going to lease the beds. But I do think that in terms of talking with existing clients about opportunities to potentially purchase things, properties that you can flip to conventional or flip to some other use or whatever the case might be, I think that is something that makes sense. Regardless, even if we are dealing with an existing owner, it's really all comes down to data. You're going to sit down, you're going to talk about the data, and hopefully they'll listen to you, understand what you're saying. Sometimes there's just some properties out there that are functionally obsolete just because there isn't enough kids to live in them for their intended purpose.
So in a world where it's getting harder and harder to get property level data.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
How do we prepare ourselves for that?
Exactly.
Well, I think it goes
different question, right?
Yeah, and I think it goes beyond property level data. I think it underscores the importance of being dialed in to the on-campus world. That's a little biased because that's where I come from, but it underscores the importance of being aware of the university system, long-term goals, short-term goals. I mean, you can subscribe to just as many on-campus news alerts as you can off-campus. Just yesterday or 2 days ago, I got an alert from Northern Kentucky University. They're closing 2 residence halls because of low occupancy. It's those kinds of things that you have to be aware of, even if you have 0 on-campus assets in your portfolio. I was going to say the same thing, Jim. It's all about data. You can't go to a client or an ownership group to say, you need to stay away from this or you need to buy this. with only anecdotal data. You have to have concrete data to show them. And then to your point, they're going to make their own decision, and maybe they already did. But as long as you have the right data in front of you and you can share that with them, that's all you can do as a property management group, right?
Yeah, and I think the other component on the data side, especially when it comes to underwriting or looking at kind of the go forward picture on an asset, is really understanding the macro world around the city rather than just the university, especially if in some of those tertiary markets where, you know, there may be some consolidation risk that may leave a property exposed. Like really understanding what are the dynamics of the property, how's it designed, would it actually make sense on a flip to a multifamily, you know, asset from a structural standpoint? Is it a unit that people would want to live in? But then also understanding, you know, some more of just general economics around it to really gauge that risk, especially on the front end of like, what's that risk on the consolidation front?
Well, here's the issue that I have with the data part of it. You know, ultimately we can get from our competitors what we need to in order to show, you know, illustrate something to an owner. We can certainly get it from the conventional subset. The university data, when I look at enrollment, because I've gone through this process and you get numbers and then you start digging in with the university of, okay, but how many of these are full-time people that are full-time students that are actually on campus that need housing, and they're not tracking that. They don't want to track it.
They're trying to make their numbers look as positive as they can.
Yeah.
Because they have to raise money just like anyone else.
Yeah. Any suggestions if there's an administrator or a chancellor that's out there and they know they've got an issue in their market of this, that you would say, hey, you need to start tracking this data differently?
Well, I think that's why, again, it underscores the importance of relationship building with your university partners. No pun intended, Chris. You have to have great relationships with them. And you can't start that conversation when you need the data. You have to invest and build that relationship from the get-go.
Yeah, but this is in situations where there is great relationships. They just don't track the number. I mean, that's my issue with it. But anyway, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I can sense the frustration, right? No, but I think in my experience, if you have great relationships with the right folks on campus, be it in the IR office or the DOS office, they will be able to share more than what's on their website. A lot of the big state schools, they have to break it down to a certain degree, maybe not all the way down to what you're seeking, but they know because they have those conversations. They just don't maybe publish it in the ways that we would like. But if you've got great relationships with the right folks on campus, they will be able to help you beyond what is on their institutional research office website.
Yeah, I think some of that remains to be seen too, right? I think we'll see more, you know, strategic planning on the part of the universities, and they'll start to have to get really, you know, careful, methodical, and like say, hey, like this is where we expect to be. I think, you know, one of the themes of this question too is like, what aren't we talking about?
Right.
I think last year we talked a lot about the international enrollment picture.
Yep.
We aren't really talking as much about that this year, but when you look forward, you know, especially when it comes to like the enrollment cliff and declining birth rates and all of that, a big piece of what was supposed to replace that was international enrollment. So I think going forward, like, I don't think anyone's going to be first, like to show their cards as to like what they expect, but you know, the international piece, you know, is an important thing that we kind of need to track going forward, because that's one of the more meaningful, call it tailwinds, that can help reduce the impact of the.
Yeah, it supplements.
Yeah, just to bring some value for the listeners, because I've been getting a lot of questions on international students, and one resource is same issue with data that we get from universities. By the time we get it, it's 6 months too late.
Yeah.
But one source I would ask you to definitely dig into, Karen, I'm blanking on her last name, but she works with the Chronicle of Higher Education. She has a newsletter called Latitudes. So if you just Google Latitudes, the Chronicle, you'll come up with it. And she's providing some incredible insight as to what agents and other folks are talking about right now with, especially when it comes to visas and everything else. So definitely tune in. So, all right, I want to talk about consolidation amongst operators. We're continuing to see a lot of the top 25 operators merging or acquiring one another. The biggest this past year was Hugo's acquisition of Campus Advantage, but we also continue to see a lot of operators who are growing their footprint through white label services. So I've got two questions. One, what's your personal prediction for 2026? Will we see any other top 25 operators merge or acquire? And then the other one, Jim, you've been a part of some huge acquisitions. You were at ACC when they acquired College Park Communities. You were added to the Hugo team in the acquisition of Campus Advantage. Bryan, you were at EDR when Greystar took them private, and then University Partners, of course, had that big deal with KKR. And for those that are listening to the podcast, and maybe it's an executive that's looking to construct the next deal or a merger, or maybe it's a regional manager that's just being told, their portfolio is about to go somewhere, or they're about to get a much larger portfolio. What advice or lessons learned would you share with them on how to prepare to transition platforms, people, et cetera, with those mergers?
I guess to the first question, yes, I think there will be consolidation. I've heard some rumors, but beyond that, I can't speak to it. But I do think that there will be. That would be my prediction, especially if the environment picks up a little bit to where things can transact. I think, if you're talking about a big merger in student housing, by the bed student housing, I think that if it's for an owner or for a company, if you're looking at taking on a big portfolio, I just cannot underestimate that just to say that it's probably going to be a lot harder than you think. You think it's going to be hard, but it's even going to be harder. It is difficult to scale in by-the-bed student housing. Certainly there's people that do it. We've done it. We've made it work, but it is challenging. I think that, again, more so talking about this in terms of a company that's thinking about doing it or owners that think about doing it, I think it's, very important to invest early and often in firepower. You don't take on a big portfolio and do it on the lean. That's just not the way that it really works or works well. You need to really work very difficult to connect with the staff of the existing properties that are there, to really connect with them, to hopefully convince them to stay on board. It is so much more challenging, as we all know this, to buy a property, let alone a portfolio where you don't have any staff at the helm. And we've probably all been there at some point in time, and it's a big challenge. And then really it's, have time to plan for this, right? It's one of those, sometimes it's like, going to buy property and we're going to close right away. There really is value to being able to have your operating team, you have some time to plan, get your ducks in a row, talk to the staff that's there, kind of build up your bench on the inside. Because that's a big thing, right? If you're going to add, 30 properties to your portfolio, you can't do it with your existing resources. You're going to have to bring in a bunch of supplemental resources to do it. That just doesn't happen overnight. So.
Yeah, I echo all of that. I went through this, as you said, from the perspective of a regional manager while at EDR, and then I came in to be home on the very end of an acquisition of the Park 7 properties, 6 of those Park 7 properties. And to me, the most important thing is honesty. You got to say 5 words to the people that are impacted. This is going to suck. Because I don't think that people are honest with the teams that they take on. There was a study done years ago when I was in grad school in the Miami area where they polled some folks that were waiting in line at the Miami Marlins stadium. And long story short, the people that they told the line was going to be an hour and a half were substantially more content than those that they told the line was going to be 10 minutes. And so the story of that is, the moral of that is, be honest with the people. tell them it's going to be very rocky, because it is. It doesn't matter. To your point, Jim, it doesn't matter how much you prepare for an acquisition or a merger, whether you're taking on 19 properties or 5 properties or even 1 property. It's going to be very difficult. Even if you prepare and you plan, you have great checklists and you have a great team that's taking it on, it's going to be tough. And you need to be honest with your people, because why not, under promise and over deliver, as opposed to, trying to paint a picture of rainbows and butterflies, and then it ends up being really awful on the people. Because that's the most important thing, to your point. If you can retain the people throughout these processes, you're in a world of a better situation.
Yeah, and I think too, in that, especially in the initial phases of a big transition like that, really focusing on, the big things that really matter out of the gate instead of trying to focus on everything at once.
Yeah.
And I think that, the biggest thing is just giving the team and your leaders the ability to say, like, no, like that can wait. And I think, as leaders, we're kind of charged with that to kind of lead by example there and make sure, especially like getting a hold of the pre-lease, like getting a hold of the team, making sure that they know they're supported. I think being honest with them up front, as you mentioned, is really important. The second thing I'd add is getting control of the data. And I think the data, the sooner you can get the data coming in, that just really gives visibility to see, to kind of test like, hey, like here everything's going well, but maybe it's not because we're seeing this, this, and this. So it's a way to reinforce what the team is seeing on site on a day-to-day basis. And then I think, Bryan, you mentioned it, make sure that there's those pathways for the team to ask for help. And, one thing we say a lot is, hey, if you ask and we say no, that's on us. But if you don't ask, that's on you. And so really making sure that, especially the leaders that are charged with making sure that transition is successful, have the ability to ask for what they need and don't make it hard for them to do it.
Yep.
I want to go back to the first question that we talked about on recruiting specifically, because there's somebody in our audience that I want to highlight really quick that has put together something fantastic for recruiting and specifically maintenance professionals. And
shameless plug.
Yeah, absolutely. So Adrian with Multifamily X, and if you couldn't see him, he also has orange shoes on, so you won't be able to miss that. But Adrian, he does host the Multifamily X podcast, but he's also started an organization that's going through the nonprofit functions right now of getting that set up, but is an apprenticeship program for apartment maintenance. And I think that's something that's been long needed, and really appreciate Adrian and his partners working on that, and make sure that you talk to him about that for sure. And make sure you subscribe to his podcast as well. All right. So I want to really quick talk about, we've talked about some of these larger acquisitions. Now I want to talk about some of these larger assets. I've managed some 1,200 bed communities. Property you spent a lot of time on, Granville Towers and Chapel Hill, 1,400 beds, I think.
1,400 beds with food service, yeah.
Yeah. What I remember about anything that's really over about 900 beds is it's a different kind of staff. And so, and I know a couple of people think I'm talking about their companies out in the crowd. But
there's some big ones going on.
There's some big ones. This is just the announcements from the past 4 months. 1,300 bed development at Clemson, 1,700 bed development at Purdue, 1,200 bed development at Texas A&M, 2,350 bed development at University of South Carolina, 950 bed development at Michigan, and 1,000 bed development at LSU. I've got a lot of questions around ultimate exit strategies, but I'll leave that up to the brokers and everybody else at this conference. My question for you guys, since you guys have you two have certainly had experience at these larger properties, what are the operational differences of a 1,000 to 3,000 bed asset versus a 500 bed property? And what experience and qualification does a site manager for these mega properties have to have?
I'll let you go first.
Okay. All right. So I think the desire to do these mega assets is because they pencil better, right? I mean, they're bigger, so they can get more bed count, to get more revenue, to deal with expensive land, and there are efficiencies to it, right? So I think from a development standpoint, your payroll can be a little bit leaner. You only have one GM, you only have one soup, what have you. So I think that's that perspective. I think from an operational perspective, though, as it gets bigger, it doesn't get exponentially easier. It gets exponentially harder. And, I've wondered about that over the years, because you always found that your big properties, were kicking your butt for one reason or another, and trying to figure all that out. But, when you talk about the differences, if you've got 1,000 beds versus 500, you got to lease every bed every year regardless, right? So that's just that, 500 more leases, 500 more guarantors that you have to get. You got to collect all the money. You've got turn that you're getting done. And again, you could say, well, you have a big staff to do it, and that's true. You have to have it, but it's still, like, you still only have that one leader at the top. It's just different. It's just exponentially more difficult to do. The other thing in terms of leasing it, people like what they like. They like this property for this niche, whatever the case might be. If you get something that's big, at some point, there's just a finite number of people that want what you're offering. And so it does always seem to be exponentially more difficult to run the bigger ones than the smaller ones.
Agreed. And I would add to that, and it's a bit cliche, but to me, the biggest difference, when we were talking about this, it brought me back to my days as a manager, and I had 1,280 beds, 4 properties. And I remember, I would say at least 75% of my time was dealing with people. I had 78 team members at peak, and it was incredibly difficult with how much of my day was centered around supervision, hiring, firing, and granted, these are the days of manual HR forms and all that, but it was, you have to be so much better with people. You can kind of get by leaning on your HR team and whatnot when you have a property of 500 people, 500 residents, 500 beds. But when you have 1,000, 1,500, 2,350, you have to be excellent with people. You have to know what makes them tick. You have to hire very, very well. You don't have to be an expert in all things. When I was a manager, I knew nothing about maintenance, right? But you have to hire a really good maintenance supervisor and maintenance team. You have to hire a really good sales and marketing person, a leasing marketing manager. So I just underscore the importance of being very good with hiring, firing, unfortunately, and just managing and supervising your people.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. We started kind of the conversation around, roadblocks in recruiting. I think, if you're the best if you think you're the best manager in your market with some of these big developments coming in, like, probably a pretty exciting opportunity for them. And I think what comes to mind for me is, there's a book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And I think, if you think you're the best manager in your market and that you should be running that building, I think the biggest thing you want to emphasize is, what are you going to do differently in that job that you don't do today? Because I think a lot of times, a lot of really good managers, what got them there was they could put the team on their back when they needed to. When it was crunch time, they could get the leases, they could get the results, they could fix the problem. But when you're running a deal that size, like, you can't do it on your own. Yeah. And so to your point, like, the leadership element of it is like, give me examples of how you leverage your team when you hit a roadblock versus you just put it on your back and carried us all up the hill.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're really literally doing everything through your people, as opposed to at 300 to 500 beds. A lot of times, some people that are successful there, to your point, pretty much doing it themselves.
Yeah. And I would add to that, you made me think of a quote that I heard recently. IQ gets you into the room. EQ makes you stay there. And I think that is really relevant here, because IQ can get you the job at a 500 bed property. At a 2,000 bed property, it takes more EQ than it does IQ.
For sure.
Okay, so I was going to try to break it down from a tangible aspect and say, is the MBA required? I think you just answered that question. It's probably helpful, isn't necessary. So now you're talking about where, like, on the, with the DISC assessment, is that a strong D? Is it a strong C? Have you guys thought about that at all?
Oh, I don't think it matters as long as you surround yourself with complementary people. I don't think it matters. You could be anything on the spectrum. You think of Myers-Briggs. It doesn't matter what letter you are in the alphabet, as long as you surround yourself with the right people and complementary, right? Because that's what mistake a lot of people make is everybody's got to be an ISTJ like me. Well, no, you don't want all ISTJs. You want to be challenged. So you want to have different kinds of people. So to answer your question, I don't think there is a right answer. It depends on what does the manager look like, and then you want to surround yourself with other different minded people.
Is there, I think one thing that I see a lot of organizations dealing with when they have got that larger property is the manager for that 1,500 bed property may have a higher salary than any of their regional managers.
Mm-hmm.
How do you guys approach that? Is there a
salary compression?
Yeah. Well, I have said in the past, if you'd like the job, you're more than welcome to move to wherever it is, and you can take it, and we'll pay you that amount of money. And but yeah,
I mean, really, it is a regional level role at that that level.
Well,
so
it
it should
is.
be generally in line. Overall.
All right, so we're going to move to our Q&A portion. And again, this is kind of a reverse Q&A. So we are at your tables and chairs. You should have a paddle there provided by Leap. And these are going to be, some are questions, some are statements. So if you agree with it, or if it's in the affirmative, make sure you use the check, and then X, obviously, for the negative. All right. So our ambassadors came up with these questions. I think I had about 30 of these questions, and then I sent it over to these guys to vote on. So these are the questions that they want to hear you guys answer. So the first one, this is operating student housing has gotten harder over the past 5 years.
Do not put your X
I
up.
don't see any X's.
No, all check marks.
All right. Industry outlook. Operational execution matters more than location today. Okay. Some people that are location.
couple
All right. All right. Leasing and marketing. Social media influences leasing decisions more than property websites. Again, social media influences leasing decisions more than property websites.
Kind of split. We got a few X's here.
Yeah.
Quite a few.
I'm looking at the marketing people, and they're all thumbs up on that one. All right. Operations and centralization. Has centralization improved efficiency overall? Ooh, got some X's on there.
Several.
Okay. Kind of a mix. Technology and AI. Will technology reduce the need for on-site staff over time? It's still a mix. All right. Resident experience. This is another one. There's 3 choices, and you guys each chose a different one. So I get to be the tiebreaker. Do students value convenience more than luxury today? I think that's
Across the board.
Jordan's the lone X here. Okay. Yeah, exactly. All right. The other one under resident experience, and I want to bring up opinion once again. If you're needing resident satisfaction software, they're the best at it. Do residents expect faster service than they did 5 years ago? That's all affirmative. All right. People and culture. Would you recommend student housing as a career today?
We actually have some X's.
Yeah.
Several.
honest.
Yeah, I like it.
Do we sometimes follow industry trends a little too quickly? I think everybody agrees with that. Well, hopefully those were some great discussion points to get some more great discussion started during the conference. And guys, with that being said, I want to thank our guests for taking the time out, not only for being here this morning, but last week for the prelim call, and really appreciate you guys taking the time out to do that. Looking forward to more conversations. And a big thank you to our audience for being here live. Thanks, gentlemen.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
All right. I thought that was a great conversation. I hope you did as well. And I just want to give another big thanks to Jim and Chris and Bryan for being our guests and kind of, in a lot of ways, I guess, exposing, what's happening within their companies and some of the struggles that they're having, certainly things, throughout their career that they've noted and see areas of improvement. I think it takes a lot for anybody to get in front of their peers and have those honest conversations. So again, big thanks to them, as well as everyone who joined us live in Austin. A lot of those folks ended up changing their flights and everything so that they could get in early. And if you were flying that weekend and went into Austin, you know how hectic it was because of stuff going on with TSA and everything else. So there are several takeaways from this discussion that I think it's probably worth emphasizing and recapping a little bit. I'm not sure if you're the same way I am, but a lot of times when I listen to a podcast, my mind will drift and I didn't pick up something. And then my wife or somebody later will say, "Hey, did you hear that podcast?" And they heard something I just completely missed out on. So just to recap, first, recruiting is not the root of the problem. Retention seems to be the root of the problem. That was just a really consistent theme. And we're spending a lot of time talking about how to hire talent and, but not enough time really focused on why people are leaving. And in many cases, I think it's because, the expectations of these roles. I'll talk about my next point is to talk about regional managers. But a lot of these roles have really increased significantly without the structure or the support to match it. And so, again, my second point here was on the regional manager role, and that it really may be the most difficult job in the industry today. There's more reporting, there's more platforms, there's more client interaction, and just more complexity than ever before. And yet we're not always evolving that role fast enough to keep up with those demands. So the third point, when it comes to acquisitions and growth, the message was pretty clear. It's a lot harder than you think. Even when you plan for it, even when you prepare, integrating teams and systems and culture is incredibly difficult. And, I think some of the best piece of advice that was shared was simple but powerful. And that's just be honest with your people. I think it was Bryan that said it. Set the expectations early, because those transitions are never as smooth as we want them to be. All right, so moving on to point number 4. There are macro risks that we're not talking about enough within this industry. Declining enrollment, demographic shifts, all of these are and not just that, but budgets as well. There's all these pressures on higher education institutions that, these are real factors that, will impact certain markets, especially the tertiary markets. And as operators, we need to be prepared to really have those conversations with our clients. And that also needs to be backed by data and not just a lot of assumptions, which I think they spoke to pretty well. And then finally, scale changes everything. Managing, a 2,000 bed asset is just not a bigger version of a 500 bed property. It's completely different. It's a completely different job, and success at that level really comes down to leadership and team building and emotional intelligence, and not just execution. So that's that's really why I enjoy these live conversations. You get perspectives that are real and unfiltered and really grounded in what people are actually dealing with day to day. So, if you found this valuable, make sure that you're plugged into everything that we're doing at Student Housing Insight, and don't forget to register for our monthly Shop Talk webinars, where we really continue these conversations, around the data and of course policy updates and all things operations. All right, we're at the end here. I want to say a big thanks to our sponsor, Jameson Bedding. As you're getting closer to turn, and you realize, many of you may realize, I didn't order enough mattresses. Make sure you reach out to our buddy Keith at Jameson, and he'll make sure that you are set for move-in day. You can find out more about Jameson by going to studenthousingmattress.com. Again, that's studenthousingmattress.com. We'll provide a link in the show notes as well. Again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care.